That's really all that it is, but I think you will find, Mickey, that lots of different types of experiences end up working well in intelligence careers anyway, because intelligence involves like so much different kind of stuff. So we're going to talk about nonprofits today. Part of the reason, honestly, that I put this on the schedule for this year's presentations is because earlier, kind of like back over the summer, I was getting some questions from students, and this is, you know, it's fine, and y'all may know the more about this than these students did, but questions like, or comments like, I want to work for a nonprofit, I really believe in this cause, but I also know that I need a job where I can get paid. And so I was like, yeah, but nonprofits pay. It doesn't mean that they don't bring money in or pay people to do work. They gotta have employees, and so of course they pay. But what in your mind, if you're thinking about it right now, and we'll get into this in a little more depth, what do you think a nonprofit really is? Like, what makes an organization a nonprofit?
They're not necessarily like profiting off of like the services that they're offering.
Sure, yeah. But again, doesn't mean they're not bringing money in, right? But for-profit entities, say, I don't know, Bank of America, Coca-Cola, Home Depot, I'm thinking in terms of those last two Atlanta corporations, but like they essentially exist to make money for their shareholders. You know, it doesn't mean that people who work there don't also necessarily like they're not enthusiastic about the product or the service. You know, but it's just that is their primary directive. And for nonprofits, that's not the case. You know, they exist in order to live up to some kind of a mission. You know, and it can be all kinds of different things. What even is a nonprofit? So, UGA is a nonprofit. Most colleges and universities in America, public and private, are nonprofit entities because their goal is education, ultimately. You know, there are other kind of separate goals, you know, alongside of that. So, for instance, it's not just to help students to learn; it's also to help students to get credentials, say to get a bachelor's degree so that you qualify for a master's degree if you want to do that, or PhD or whatever. Do you want me to close the door?
No, sorry. No, it's perfect.
It was stuffy at first when I came in here. It's getting better, but I also I know it's allergy season and I don't want anybody to start sneezing, which could be me. We'll see how this goes. And yet, UGA that I mentioned here has the highest paid employee, the highest paid state employee in the state of Georgia is Kirby Smart, head football coach. $10.5 million a year. Jerry Moorhead, the president, what do you think his salary is? Yes.
300K. Like 5
Between the two?
Yeah.
It's close to $1 million. It's not quite to $1 million. Still quite a lot of money, but less than 1/10 of what the football coach makes.
Yeah.
Right? And so why would a nonprofit organization pay Kirby Smart or someone like him that much money?
It makes the school football program. Yeah.
That's right. The idea, right, is if we have a good football program, and it's very popular, and lots of people watch it on TV, lots of people go to the games, people buy the merchandise, right? It's all generating revenue to help the school itself operate and provide that educational mission. The president, of course, has a lot to do with that as well, but the president does not appear every Saturday in the fall, you know, winning football games. His job is a bit different here. So that's just to say there can be lots of money. In fact, there is a lot of money involved in nonprofits. There are several different types. For instance, and I'm going from the bottom up here, churches are technically nonprofits, but we don't normally treat them that way. In part because they don't pay taxes. They have kind of a special relationship with the US government thanks to the First Amendment. They raise typically kind of their own money, maybe a collection plate goes around, maybe they have a Venmo or, however they want to do it. They have operating expenses and they have to pay their employees, but they're typically not regarded as nonprofits in that same way. And yet, if you look up at the top when we talk about NGOs, there are religious organizations that are like legitimate nonprofits and that do pay taxes. So Catholic Relief Services, the Red Cross, the Red Crescent. Here we work actually with at least one entity called Downtown Ministries that provides, it's like after school tutoring and sports and activities for local school children from underserved communities around Athens. Another one, if y'all are looking for internships that people say is really fun, there is like a kind of Christian angle to it, but that organization, Downtown Ministries, is not a church, and you don't have to be Christian to work there. They're just providing a service, Governmental entities. I love the example of public libraries. Public libraries, technically speaking, a nonprofit in a way, to provide a public service, right? But it is affiliated with the government on some level. I think I'm partial to libraries in part because my dad, before he retired, he was a librarian, and that was his career. And it always just amazed me that, any town, city of any size has this place where, for free, you can walk in and find thousands, if not millions of books and movies, sometimes video games. You can find all kinds of stuff. You can use the computer services for free. And we just do that. Right? I think that's really cool about our society. But in that sense, libraries are they kind of straddle the line because they accept donations, they have book sales, they have to make some of their own money, but a lot of it also comes from taxes. So sort of in between. Here, I just mentioned again that, wages are involved. That said, another email I got from a recent graduate once was, this student said that they had been disappointed in the kinds of pay that was being offered by nonprofits. Now, a little bit of a caveat here. This student was looking to work for various homeless shelters, okay? Homeless shelters really don't have a lot of money to run on. I mean, it's entirely donation driven, and people do it as a labor of love, basically. We actually have an internship, several internship openings right now with the local homeless shelter, in fact, and a lot of students love to do that kind of work. But that's a kind of nonprofit that just does not have the funds where they can pay, they maybe say the rates that other types of nonprofits might. An organization with, a global reach typically can afford to pay a bit more. I mean, something like, say, the Red Cross. When you have an organization that's that big, they have to be able to hire all kinds of different people to run it. They need their own lawyers. They need their own doctors because they're providing a lot of medical help, And in order to lure people out of those lucrative fields who they need, they've got to be able to compete on some level with that. They may still, yes, working in a private law firm might still make a little more money, right? But the Red Cross has got to compete. And part of the reason too that jobs like medical doctors, lawyers, and so forth, part of the reason that they pay so much in the end is because they cost so much to attend school to get there. Law school and medical school are very expensive. Veterinary school, dental school, they're all very expensive. And so that's part of the reason is to help people kind of get out of all the debt that they usually are in at that point. Anyway, all just to say, all kinds of organizations need all kinds of people. Nikki, at this point, you were talking about historic Athens, right? What do you do day to day? I know Tommy pretty well, but what do y'all do there?
there, so like our mission is to like preserve, you know, the history and the culture of Athens, cause it's, you know, one of the oldest cities in Georgia. So what I personally do is I work with the, Historic Athens Welcome Center. So the Welcome Center is part of Historic Athens, like Athens City's like Welcome Center. So I'm right now implementing like a kid-friendly program so that kids are more inclined to come to the Welcome Center. They have things to do like crafts and have their own little like itinerary and stuff of like what they can do in Athens and kind of get them involved as well.
That's awesome. Yeah. And when you say you're implementing that sort of thing, does that involve like, do you do research about Athens history, events and stuff like that, or?
Yeah, so I'm also putting together like a little bit of like a field trip, so I can give it out to schools with like a packet that kind of goes with their like the standards, the Georgia standards that they have to learn and what they're also learning in school, and so they can come visit the historic Athens Welcome Center house because it's a house museum.
That's cool. But part of the reason I ask is because I want to get a sense of like what daily life within a particular nonprofit might involve. But partly too is because even though I've worked with them for a while now, I still don't always know exactly what interns are doing there because I know that it's, you know, they do a lot of things.
Yeah.
So.
I do Welcome Center stuff. We have other people working on like social media, so maintaining the presence of Historic Athens online. We have people putting out those signature events, which is how we raise money to, you know, fund the positions for people like the staff. Same thing with, we have a few people working on grant writing, which is like a really good skill for you to have and add to your resume. And that also pays for a huge chunk of people's like wages.
Yeah.
In a nonprofit, so those are kind of some of the things that we do with insurance.
It's good to know. In fact, in bullet point 2 here, I mentioned like grant writing. You know, a big part of what any nonprofit has to do is soliciting donations, but also trying to get grants, like these big chunks of money, so that they can pay their employees, they can further their cause, do whatever they need to do, and so forth. And at the very bottom, they also often need volunteers. Does Historic Athens have any volunteers?
For some events, like our Mardi Gras we had back in February, it's a really big event, so we did need volunteers for that.
Okay.
So we don't use them, we don't have volunteers like on a day-to-day basis, but for like specific events we will.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Yeah. Okay. But the Mardi Gras thing is fun. So volunteering, in fact, especially at stuff like that, if for instance, somebody really wanted to end up working professionally for Historic Athens, that type of volunteer work is often a good way to get your foot in the door. You meet the people who are there, you demonstrate the fact that you care about the cause, and so forth. It's not necessarily the way to go, right? But, and as Nikki probably knows, and Sarah and Ashley, you might find out if you get an internship through SPIA, is that SPIA is in a unique position on UGA's campus, and that the Georgia State Assembly has actually agreed to provide UGA, SPIA only, with this chunk of cash every single year. And so what we can basically do is take what would be an unpaid internship at a place like Historic Athens and turn it into a paid one. And so then, you know, Tommy or whoever's working there sends me the invoice and says, you know, this is how many hours each person has worked, and then we pay them to pay students at a rate of $16 per hour, no matter which organization you're working at. Bigger Vision of Athens, which is a homeless shelter, you know, they are really in dire need of money because it's a homeless shelter. It's run by a SPIA grad, actually. He's really cool. But it helps you all as students to get the experience doing what you'd like to do, while simultaneously getting paid, which is crucial. I mean, I think really in many positions. That's not to say you shouldn't volunteer. You absolutely should. But at the same time, like, I know what it's like to be a college student. I mean, you need money, you know, and even if it's just an hourly wage, it can certainly help. do have a couple of tips on here about getting an actual nonprofit job at some point. You really want to understand the mission of the organization that you're looking to work for. Oftentimes on nonprofits and other organizations' websites, somewhere you'll be able to find a mission statement, and that can really be helpful. It also helps, though, to understand at least a little bit about the field in which the organization works, because you want to be able to show that you believe in what they're doing. So if you're working at Bigger Vision of Athens, for instance, that's that homeless shelter that's right downtown. It's or not right downtown, but it's very close to downtown. You want to really be able to say, this is why I think it's important to help the homeless in Athens. Bigger Vision too, it's a little bit different than a lot of other homeless shelters in that, and I don't know if you've ever worked at a homeless shelter or volunteered or whatever, but most homeless shelters, when a person applies to be admitted, they say, okay, we've got a bed, we've got a place where you can sleep, we can give you breakfast and dinner, say, every day, a couple of meals. We've got some laundry facilities and all of that. We can give you that for up to, let's say 2 months, right? So you can stay there for a while. Meanwhile, you're applying to jobs, you're trying to find a different place to live, whatever. Bigger Vision is what they call an emergency homeless shelter. And so the way that they operate is, it is first come, first serve every day. And people will, sort of towards the evening, if you know where it is, people will start gathering kind of outside and just say, can I get in tonight, right? And the reason that there's a need for something like that is that these are people who, they might not have been able to get a bed at a traditional homeless shelter just yet. Like maybe they just got evicted today, or somebody threw them out of their house or whatever. And they're just like, I just need a place to sleep tonight, And so Bigger Vision is there to provide that sort of thing. I do mention at the bottom, these are both large entities. Sierra Club is predominantly American, based in the United States. Greenpeace is headquartered in the United States, but it's an international operation. Anybody heard of Sierra Club before? Yeah? Anybody heard of Greenpeace before? You have? Yeah? Just off the top of your head, can you think, what are their missions?
Definitely something to do with the environment, but I'm not sure. I've heard of them. I just don't know what exactly they do.
That's cool. So they're both very large, basically environmental protection advocacy groups, right? The Sierra Club does a lot of educational outreach. They also provide funds to help preserve land, help preserve endangered species of animals, and stuff like that. Greenpeace, on the other hand, they are the people who are out there chaining themselves to trees, to stop them from cutting down. They're the people who are out, in the boats attacking whaling ships and all of that sort of thing. So, mission statement, very similar. Their tactics, very different. And I pulled up, I could escape out of here for just a minute. You can even kind of see this in the nature of just the photos on their website. You've got people out enjoying nature. Some protesting here, sure, that we got that in common with Greenpeace. And also just enjoying the outdoors, as opposed to something like Greenpeace. That's a bad image. Yeah, now we have megaphones involved. And both, either valid ways of approaching these different situations. But Greenpeace traditionally is a little bit more activist in terms of just getting out in the field, putting themselves in danger oftentimes, in the name of environmental protection. So those are just some things to kind of keep in mind about these sorts of organizations. Another similar pairing, I mentioned the Red Cross or Red Crescent in predominantly Arabic countries as well. very similar in many ways to an organization called Doctors Without Borders. Familiar with Doctors Without Borders? Yeah. What do you know? Do you have any idea what some differences might be, though? They're both providing a lot of aid to people in need. And the Red Cross.
I think the Red Cross is more geared to like supplies, natural disasters,
Yep.
kind of thing. Doctors Without Borders is like more service, I feel like
Mhm.
doctors actually traveling and working at local hospitals and like areas that are in need of them.
Yeah, that's a good way of thinking about it. The Red Cross does provide a lot of medical services too, but a whole lot of what they provide is like supplies, you know, and a lot of times you'll see an organization like the Red Cross operating in the United States, or not limited to it, obviously, but here, like, you know, if a really bad hurricane comes through, the Red Cross will be there on the ground. They've got like fresh water, food they're handing out, you know, providing sandbags for flooding, all kinds of stuff like that. Doctors Without Borders is basically medical assistance, and one other difference is that they are providing medical assistance to civilians in war zones, specifically, or places where there's a great deal of violence. And as such, Doctors Without Borders is oftentimes kind of a more dangerous job, although Red Cross work can be pretty dangerous too, and they do also operate oftentimes in war zones. There's a reason, though, a very important reason, that both of those organizations only provide medical care to civilians. Why might that be?
Because they don't want to like show interest on one side or the other during war.
Exactly. They're not there for political reasons, you know. Armies, militaries, those organizations, they gotta provide their own medical care, and they do, you know, in most cases. But Doctors Without Borders is there for people who are basically caught in the crossfire, you know. And that could be a very frightening experience, I'm sure. A lot of times their workers are doctors, nurses, physical or physician's assistants, and so forth, who take some time away, say like a year or two away from their regular job, to go and do that work. You know, I'm sure they're going to make a lot less money doing that, but it's something they care about very deeply. And of course, it sounds like an amazing cause. You know, then it can be something really, really good to do. Something similar that we have actually in Atlanta is an organization called the Atlanta Volunteer Lawyers Foundation. And lawyers will oftentimes take time off, maybe like a big swath of time, or maybe they spend, you know, a weekend or two a month, basically providing legal representation to people in the Atlanta area who can't otherwise afford it, but who need it. You know, and there are lots of organizations like this, which is to say that whether it's volunteer work or being paid, even if you're not working for a nonprofit, you can still work for a nonprofit. You know, just like take some time away and go and do that. And in fact, lots of nonprofits around the world are involved in teaching. You know, that's a lot of. I don't know if anybody's ever thought about the Peace Corps, you know, in the future at some point. But a lot of Peace Corps volunteers go overseas, live in a community for a couple of years, and often will like teach English to the local population if it's a population that either doesn't speak English or that just like lacks teachers, you know, and they just need somebody to be there. And you don't have to be a certified teacher to do that sort of work. These places just, you know, they need help. And so the Peace Corps can provide that. Peace Corps is affiliated with the US government, but it operates essentially the same as a nonprofit. There are other organizations like this too. USAID is one of them. And they're very important, not just to the people that they're helping, but also because they represent, you know, something good from the United States, in a way that the people in the U.S. can help the rest of the world. Bring this back up again. the most recent talk I gave was all about job interviews, and I've kind of tweaked this just a little bit. But basically, when we're talking about the differences between Sierra Club versus Greenpeace, those differences in how they operate are sometimes reflected in what you might refer to as office culture, which is to say how people dress. Just curiously, and I don't know much about this. By the way, I was a professor for 10 years at Berry College before I took this job. I taught, I have an undergraduate degree in international affairs, but I was actually teaching creative writing, which is interesting. There's a whole story behind that. I can tell you about it sometime. But anyway, that's what I was teaching. And what I learned when I started working as a professor was that I didn't need to wear a suit and tie every day. Most professors don't. Some do. I get the impression that Bullock does, but just because I always see him in a tie, but I don't know, and I could be wrong. Whereas if you've ever had a class with Eric Van de Kamp, he's wearing like a Hawaiian shirt and some blue jeans, maybe shorts. I know on Halloween he dressed up as a cowboy. But it's just to say that like within the academic field, and maybe depending a little bit on which school you're teaching at, there's a bit more flexibility. Like you would want to dress up nice for the interview, a little bit more formal. But in many cases, it's not as formal. If you go to work in DC, it oftentimes is a little more formal. Yeah, we've got people working on Capitol Hill. Lots of lawyers working in different capacities all over the city, and people, working at nonprofits too. But people who are dressed up for those nonprofits. I used to work in DC, lived there for a little while. And it was something I noticed every day, like when I take the metro into work, is that especially at that time of the morning, it's rush hour. It's like 90% of the people on that subway are in ties, business suits. They look kind of the same, but that's so much of the culture in DC. And if you're not in DC, it might be a little different. I would imagine if you were applying to work at the Sierra Club, you might want to dress up a little more formally than if you're applying to work at Greenpeace, because Greenpeace is where you're going to get your hands dirtier. That said, if you really just don't know, and that's okay, I would say business formal. For guys, might be a nice tie, some kind of a, like a blazer, some kind of a suit, not something that's super bright, that sort of thing. Also say, and this is true of any job interview, really, even if it's an interview for an internship, is you really want to present yourself as somebody that these people want to work with, because you're going to be working with them. And I know from experience, having had numerous jobs leading up to the one that I have now, that the people you work with can end up mattering just as much, if not more, even than the work that you're doing. Thankfully, Catherine is right next door to me. Our team over there I think is really cool. They're easy to get along with. I really like working with them, and I happen to like the work that I do here. But you definitely want to come off as somebody who's, friendly. I know you might not feel relaxed inside, but during a job interview always, but the more relaxed you can be, the better. In the last presentation I gave, I suggested on the day of the interview, if you've got to have a cup of coffee to wake yourself up, to get ready for it, fine. I would not overdo it on the caffeine, because it can increase your anxiety, and that can make you make mistakes, and do things that you might regret later. I know what it's like to leave a job interview and think, oh man, I really blew that one question, and then to get offered the job anyway, because it turns out there's enough to offset that, or maybe nobody really thought about it that much or whatever. This may sound obvious, but during a job interview, if you are ever offered alcohol, do not take the alcohol. I don't care if you're 21 years old at least, or what part of the interview is going on at that moment, just say no thanks. When I applied for my job at Barry as a professor, and this is kind of typical for academic faculty jobs like that. I went through a series of interviews that lasted a day and a half, which was grueling. At the end of the process on the second day, the chair of the English department at the time at Barry invited me and the other faculty members over to his house. He had a really nice house. And he was like, oh, let's serve some beers. I'm like, Will, come here, have a beer. The interview's over. In my mind, I'm like, no, it's not. Y'all are all still here, right? This is that interview. The whole process is a first impression. If you decide after the interview's over, you're like, I need a beer. Fine, enjoy it then. But be careful, in the event that to avoid that sort of thing. Something else that can sometimes happen is that sometimes the interviewer might say, let's do the interview and then actually let's go grab something to eat. Maybe no alcohol is involved. You're just going out to lunch. They're going to get to know you a little bit better. Don't order anything that's really messy. Because that's not going to be the moment when you want to be spilling stuff accidentally, and things like that. That I've heard, and I don't know if they still do this, but that a lot of high-powered law firms, whether it's in New York or Atlanta or wherever, that they will oftentimes on purpose take their applicants out to dinner and on purpose order them lobster. Why do you think that would be? Anybody ever eaten lobster before? No? Lobster has this reputation for being a really fancy food, an expensive food, It's an extremely messy food because you have to open all the shells and stuff, and it's things, it can I don't know, it can get all over the place. That's why oftentimes when people eat lobster, they give them a bib, it's one of the only times as an adult that you still need a bib, And what they want to see is how are you under pressure? You over there embarrassing yourself in front of us. How do you feel now? How are you going to react to this? Because they need people who can handle the pressure in the courtroom. But all of that is a test. So just something to keep in mind. Unless you happen to be in that situation with a law firm or something like that, it's probably not going to come up. But it's best generally, I think, order a salad or something. You don't want some kind of hamburger where the stuff's just dripping out all over the place. Just a small tip. Let's see. Okay. Oh, I know where I'm going to go next. That is the last slide that I have, but I wanted y'all to know about this website. This is called Idealist. And it's idealist.org. Org, as you know, it's usually the URL suffix for nonprofit entities. And Idealist, well, let me ask you this first. You familiar with usajobs.gov? Anybody? Yeah, you've been there actually? So USA Jobs is the website where most jobs within the federal government post their job listings at usajobs.gov. There are some exceptions, but anybody can access the website, and you can search through hundreds, even thousands of job postings at any given time. Idealist was created to be a nonprofit version of that. So it is not going to necessarily contain all listings from every nonprofit, but it is designed to be a place where nonprofits can go and list their current offerings, and you can narrow it down, similarly to usajobs.gov as well, by things like location, type of work, salary range, all kinds of filters that you can use to get in there and see who's hiring right now. So I just want you to be aware of this. I think actually a little bit less overwhelming than USA Jobs, because USA Jobs can be a lot, but Idealist is pretty cool. And once you create a profile here, you can upload a current resume and then use that, as part of the job application process and so forth. Any questions? Anything you would add? That's a good question. There's a single application that you use that when you fill it out, it will ask you sometimes like, do you know of any particular types of internships you might like to have, or specific internships that you want to apply for? And you upload a resume there, it goes to me, and I take that and send it out to the different places. And so the best way to know who's offering jobs at any given moment is to just talk to me, set up an appointment. We can talk about that. I'm happy to help with your resume too, if you want me to like look it over or give any suggestions. I can also help with cover letters. And so, but at any given moment, I'm usually the best source for that. However, that said, there is a weekly email that comes out too, and it typically lists at least a few of the internships that are currently looking for applicants too. So, but that's a great question.
I think one big mistake that I kind of regret throughout my undergrad is I didn't start looking sooner, so you're never too young to start looking and applying, so definitely go for it. Get it out of the way so you're not scrambling like I was my second semester of junior year trying to find a summer internship. You'll definitely need some sort of experience before, you get hired or you have to apply for graduate school.
That's good advice, yeah. And I would add too, like even if you're very early, in your time at UGA, even if you're not yet applying, just be looking, And I'm happy to meet with anybody at any stage of that. Right now, we're looking mostly at internships that are looking to hire students over the coming summer, so we're kind of far out from the fall, but I've met with students already who just want to know kind of like what's out there in the fall, what's out there next spring, and that far out, sometimes we don't necessarily know, but there are organizations that we do know who hire all the time, and odds are they're still going to be hiring them. So, it's worth looking into. One of the more interesting internships that we're just about to start offering through SPIA is at Creature Comforts. Creature Comforts? Yeah. So Creature Comforts, founded, owned, and managed by 2 SPIA graduates, both poli-sci majors. And perhaps because of that, they have a large charitable operation that they run. And they give lots of money, they give out grants to local organizations, other nonprofits, basically. They are a for-profit entity, but they need an intern to help with their nonprofit wing, and so they're about to hire somebody for the summer. Doesn't involve beer, but, whatever. They just need some help. And they're a very generous organization, so. But there are a lot of options. There are a few options that involve remote internships that you would do entirely via a computer. BSI, I don't know if you know anybody who works with them, but so BSI is the British Standards Institute, and they provide open source intelligence research to large companies usually that need to ship cargo overseas, And so if a large company needs to ship its product from the United States to, I don't know, the Philippines, they need to know about things like what are the import laws in the Philippines that we need to be aware of? Are there political situations between the west coast of the United States and the Philippines that we're going to have to navigate through or work around? Are there weather concerns? Are there piracy concerns? I mean, there's all kinds of stuff. And so BSI provides that research. It's entirely remote. And despite the fact that, it does fit in with what a lot of our international affairs majors are working with, and political scientists too, but some people just don't want to do a remote internship because you're just sitting in a computer the whole time, you're not really interacting with people. And I don't know, it can be rewarding and provide just kind of a different experience to a lot of students too, to have something where you actually are going to this place and seeing people, including probably some other SPIA interns who are there, but also just other coworkers, clients, and so forth. And it's more of just like a full-on in-person job. But either way, we've got both options. Different places offer different options for those. The largest nonprofit internship that we partner with right now is called the IRC, International Rescue Committee, which is the largest refugee resettlement and support group in the world. They have a fairly active office in Atlanta, even though their headquarters are in Washington, but they have a large office in Atlanta because Atlanta traditionally has been a home for many people. It still is. People who are refugees from other countries and just they need to get out of that situation. There's a large Sudanese population, you know, in Atlanta, among many others. Increasingly, I've heard that there's a larger Ukrainian population. You know, people having to get out of that war zone. You know, and in many ways, like in my opinion, I think that sort of thing enriches the Atlanta area. Anybody gone to a restaurant or a grocery store out on Buford Highway? You know what I'm talking about? Like you can get all kinds of stuff there, you know, and that is a big refugee immigrant area, you know, that where a lot of communities are sort of congregated, and it's pretty amazing. But anyway, anybody else have they want to ask about? Okay, that's fine. If you want, Nikki, you're about to get out of here, but even once you leave, I can still provide help with things like, you know, when you start putting together cover letters for jobs down the road, I help with alumni too. So feel free, you know, and that goes for everybody, but also, you know, Sarah, Ashley, if y'all want to come by and meet with me, you can make an appointment with me in Sage, just like you do for just with Catherine or you know any academic advisor. But you can also just ask me questions. And if you ever want to email me a copy of your resume at any time, I'm happy to look it over. I can give some tips, suggestions, and so forth. It's a good idea with resumes to have more than one person other than yourself take a look at it. The Career Center offers a lot of that as well. And even just sometimes like, you know, you've got a friend and you're like, yeah, this person's like really into grammar, you know? Hey, I mean, you know, that can be helpful. So just let me know any way that I can help you. And yeah, I'm just gonna go turn off the video. I'm glad y'all could make it.